Okay, I get it. You don't think Egypt bombing unoccupied land in Ethiopia affects you. Think again. Hi, my name is Joe Bob, and this is Barely Paying Attention. One of the main themes behind Barely Paying Attention is to show how difficult and complicated various issues are, in particular, foreign affairs. We see people and groups get really worked up about US foreign policy, but international relations, while not usually a main focus, are often very complex. Kind of like trying to figure out how to do your taxes, but with much bigger stakes. And remember, the stakes are pretty high doing your taxes. It can be extremely confusing, and if you get it wrong, you go to jail. It's easy to hold up a sign promoting your favorite global cause, but in so many ways, things tend to be so much more complicated than the words that fit on your small piece of cardboard or even your TLDR Facebook post. Foreign policy issues are generally so much bigger than the average voter realizes, and to help understand that, we're going to break down a conflict going on right now over one of the world's most famous rivers, the Nile. When people think of the Nile River, generally they think of Egypt. And when they think of Egypt, they think of the pyramids or The Mummy starring Brendan Fraser. Then you think, whatever happened to Brendan Fraser? Which is exactly what happened when writing this joke. So we Googled, and while we're not entirely sure what he's up to now, we did learn that it is in fact pronounced Brendan Fraser and not Fraser.
That's Fraser, not Frazier. If you say Frazier, I know where you live.
You're welcome for that. But Egypt, obviously, is more than just the pyramids and the mummy. Egypt is an ancient society that has become famous and powerful in many ways due to the vastness of the Nile River. About 95% of Egyptians live along or within a short distance of the river, and its water has provided resources for the country of Egypt to thrive. And they have. However, Egypt is not the only country the Nile runs through. Sudan has also benefited greatly from the river. And if we're going to assume anything about natural resources, it's that if they're shared by different ruling powers, the most obvious reaction, someone's going to try and take control. Anything that Sudan or other upstream countries do to the Nile affects Egypt. And of course, if any upstream country were to make a drastic change to the water flow or the direction of the Nile, Egypt is going to be like,
it's going to be a no for me, dog.
Think of it like a food delivery service. If your Postmates driver brings you a sandwich, but took a bite out of the sandwich before it got to you, 1, that's gross. 2, I have less sandwich. And 3, now we're fighting. Because Egypt is so dependent on the Nile, you can see why they would get upset over any upstream country altering it in any way. Inherently, a struggle for power is going to ensue. Now, I'm not going to get into the minutia of all the little squabbles over control of the Nile, and we're just going to skip to the Nile Water Agreement. In 1929, in exchange for a bunch of other political concessions, several of the big upstream countries, including Sudan, gave Egypt veto ability over any upstream projects. Basically, if any of the upstream countries who were a part of the agreement wanted to do anything affecting the Nile, Egypt deserved the right to say,
it's going to be a no for me, dog.
Over the years, this agreement would get updated, divvying out various percentages of water flow so there was a standardized way to resolve disputes. Sweet. At this point, Egypt is happy, ain't nobody gonna be stopping their water. One problem: Ethiopia. Ethiopia is where a huge portion of the Nile's water originates, and guess who wasn't a part of the treaties regarding upstream countries? Ethiopia. For the last 100 years, it wasn't a problem that Ethiopia wasn't a part of the agreement because Ethiopia wasn't formalized enough as a country to effectively alter the water flow of the Nile. Until now. The population of Egypt, like most countries around the world, has grown drastically in the last several decades. However, the Nile River hasn't. Dependent on the Nile, Egypt used to have an abundance of food and water, but now Egypt is a water-scarce country that imports almost half of its food, which is expensive, and on top of that, importing necessities like food from other countries opens them up to vulnerabilities that can be dangerous. It's like trusting Lucy to hold the football while you kick it, except in this case, the football is food, and if she pulls it away, people starve. Egypt needs as much water as it possibly can get from the Nile to feed its people and ultimately survive. Enter the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. In other words, Egypt's worst nightmare. Ethiopia is building a dam, and behind that dam is a reservoir that needs to be filled. During the filling period, Ethiopia could drop the amount of water that gets through to Egypt by 85%, which could cripple Egypt's society. Right about now is when we start generally seeing hashtags like "Don't dam the Nile" or "Save the Nile" or even "Save Egypt." Filling the reservoir and cutting off water flow is catastrophically bad for Egypt. And those evil, evil Ethiopians are going to do it anyway. Although, Ethiopia has long been one of the world's poorer countries. And what's one of the best ways to bring a country out of poverty? Energy. The average American uses almost 200 times the amount of power that the average Ethiopian uses. So the Ethiopian government has desperately been trying to find a way to generate more electricity for its people. And the best solution they found is to build a dam that utilizes Ethiopia's natural water resource to generate power. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam would generate 16,000 gigawatts of energy to provide power to over 230 million people every single year. That's enough power to send the DeLorean back 13,223 times. By the way, that's accurate. Giving Ethiopians more energy would drastically improve the lives of millions of rural Ethiopian families. Not to mention, it would bolster their agricultural processes as well as processes in almost every industry. This dam could be what saves millions of Ethiopians from a difficult life of poverty. And Egypt is trying to stop that. Cue the Save Ethiopia hashtag, or dare I say, build the dam. Now, the biggest problem here is the amount of time it will take to fill the reservoir. Ethiopia wants to fill that sucker fast in order to get a quicker return on their investment. That would mean for about a 3 to 4 year period, it would almost completely shut off water to its Nile tributary. That would suck for Egypt, and many think that it would cause irreversible damage to the Egyptian way of life. Sort of like the irreversible damage Looney Tunes Back in Action did to Brendan Fraser's career.
Shabby job so far, Constable.
On the other hand, Egypt wants to fill the reservoir as slowly as possible to ensure the majority of water still gets through, which may take 10 to 12 years. Which would not be cool for Ethiopia because they don't want to wait another decade to start the process of getting more energy to their people. Here's the thing. Both sides have a righteous cause. Ethiopia wants to help its people out of poverty, while Egypt wants to keep its people out of poverty. So you can see why there would be some tension. How much tension? Well, Egypt is using rhetoric that makes everyone think that a conflict is inevitable if their demands aren't met, so much so that the Ethiopian government has put up anti-aircraft missiles around the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. In October 2020, President Trump even said this.
It's a very dangerous situation because Egypt is not going to be able to live that way. And they'll end up blowing up the dam. And I said it, and I say it loud and clear. They'll blow up that dam.
And here's the problem with tension. When big countries are involved with big issues, more countries end up getting involved. Everybody knows a Brandy, that girl in high school who's got major beef with Jessica over the homecoming limo. Brandy, Jessica, and their group of friends were supposed to go in the same limo, but then Jessica made out with Brandy's ex-boyfriend Colin, and now they just can't. So Jessica's got her own limo, and she's trying to get Tristan, Becky, Chad, Samantha, Dylan, and Stacy to go with her instead of Brandy, but Brandy isn't just gonna let that happen. Brandy knows that Tristan, who's currently dating Becky, made out with Samantha last year. Samantha and Becky are frenemies, and Brandy told Tristan that if he doesn't go with her limo, she's gonna tell Becky about the makeout sesh that happened at Tanner's house last year. As if... Basically, the fight is on, and all the friends are in the mix. If this situation was a TV show, it would be a cross between The OC and 24.
What do you want me to do? I'm sorry, what?
It's a similar scenario between Egypt and Ethiopia, but with bombs. Given the two countries' goals, if tensions escalate further, both sides will be rushing to gain support of other powerful and influential countries, which begs the question, what do we, the United States, do? Well, first, we need to ask, should we even get involved? There's a lot of people out there that would have a knee-jerk reaction and say, no, doesn't concern us. However, the problem with that stance is that whether we like it or not, we're probably already involved. For the last 50 years, Egypt and Israel have aided each other in local conflicts and land disputes. Egypt will come to Israel's aid when various skirmishes arise with Syria, Jordan, Hezbollah, or any other groups trying to take land in that particular region of the world. Because the US is aligned with Israel, and because Israel totally has nukes, the United States has a vested interest in Israel remaining its own sovereign state. But because our global proximity to the Middle East, instead of the US directly getting involved in Israel's local conflicts, the US leans on Egypt to support Israel militarily. Because we depend on Egypt to help keep the peace, Egypt is like, well, what are you guys going to do for us? Remember how earlier we said Egypt buys half of its food from elsewhere? Well, money for things like that come in the form of foreign aid from, guess who? The United States. At this point, I think we can all probably update our global issues sign to say, help broker a deal between Egypt and Ethiopia that maintains the lifestyle of Egyptian people as well as promotes access to energy for Ethiopia's impoverished rural communities. We've created a mutually beneficial alliance with Egypt, which is a relationship that could call in some favors in the pretty near future. If Egypt decides to bomb the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, then we have to decide how much we care about Israel. Because if we don't care about Israel, we can condemn the actions taken by Egypt and possibly even come to the defense of Ethiopia, which could cause Egypt to stop playing nice with Israel and potentially lose American foreign aid. In turn, it's possible that we lose a strategic ally in the Middle East. So if we do care about Israel and its defense against Palestine and other Middle Eastern military conflicts, then we won't condemn Egypt's decision to do what they feel is necessary to stay alive, essentially saying, screw you to Ethiopia.
But wait! There's more!
Ethiopia has built massive amounts of infrastructure in the last few decades in order to keep up with and compete in the developed world. Where'd they get all the money to do that? China. Now, China doesn't do anything out of the goodness of their hearts, so they think Ethiopian infrastructure is an investment. And if Egypt goes and blows up Ethiopian infrastructure, they're basically ruining Chinese investment. In which case, China's going to be super not cool with that, and the US needs to find a way to mediate, or we've got a proxy war on our hands between the two rivaling superpowers, the US and China. And this is all before Egypt plays the one biggest card it has, which would be shutting down the Suez Canal.
The what?
Egypt controls the Sinai Peninsula and therefore the Suez Canal. What the heck is the Suez Canal? It's one of two of the most powerful shipping and logistics points on the planet. Suez is used to ship products from China and Southeast Asia to Europe and the east coast of the United States. Closing the canal, if only just to China and its allies, would require ships to go around Africa or through Panama, which would cost more and slowly but surely increase prices for everyday products, and lessen the volume of products being purchased from China, which would at least temporarily decrease their financial power. But with one of the two canals closed, it would send substantially more traffic through the Panama Canal. And with more volume going through the Panama Canal, that would naturally hasten the construction of the Nicaragua Canal, which would compete with the Panama Canal for business. Obviously, this would anger Panama because the new canal would cut into their market share. Now we have tension in South America, Cold War-style relationships between the US and China, and a Middle East/North African fiasco, also that an Ethiopian teenager can use electricity probably to send a mean tweet about this very show. And what are we supposed to do about it? I have no idea. And that's really the point here. The objective of explaining all of this is to show how complicated foreign affairs and international political relationships can be. This, along with almost everything else, is so much more complicated than a cardboard sign with a nice sounding slogan. While we should always be critical over decisions made by the federal government, there also needs to be a component of grace. In many ways, these issues are vastly more complicated than we might think, and we would do ourselves a favor to avoid surface-level arguments over extremely complex issues. Now, I'm not saying don't be passionate about these sorts of things. I'm saying that it may be to our best interest to avoid cookie-cutter sayings that generally accompany protests regarding global relations. That's our show. For those of you barely paying attention, thanks for doing so. We'll see you next time.